This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast for Thursday evening, April 25th, 2013. We're recording at 11:02 Central Standard Time after the completion of the first round of the NFL Draft. I'm Bryan Houston, and with us right now, covering the Dallas Cowboys and the NFL Draft, Matthew Postins. How you doing, Matthew?
Hi, Brian. How are you doing?
Well, I was doing real good until I got the news that the Cowboys traded down out of the 18th pick and then proceeded to watch a safety and two or three offensive and defensive linemen being chosen after they traded down, only to see them pick Travis Frederick with the 31st pick in the first round, the center out of Wisconsin. Take me through all this. How do you feel about all the moves that were made?
Well, this is a volatile draft, and we kind of talked about that a little bit in our pre-draft podcast. It kind of felt like there was no consensus number one pick, and it felt like there could be a lot of moving around, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Eric Fisher was the number one overall pick to Kansas City. A lot of people felt it was going to be Luke Jokel, who ended up going number two to Jacksonville. There were about a half dozen trades in the first round, including the Cowboys trading down. But St. Louis made a bold move to get Tavon Austin at number 8. Miami made a very bold move to get Deion Jordan at number 3. So there's been a lot of shuffling around. But the one thing that everybody expected to happen that did happen was a lot of the top shelf offensive linemen went early in this draft. 3 of the first 4 picks were offensive linemen. Chance Warmack went off the board at 10. Jonathan Cooper went off the board at 7. DJ Fluker went off the board at 11. And really, at that point, DJ Fluker was kind of the line of demarcation. If you were looking at an offensive lineman, if you were looking at a top-shelf offensive lineman, Fluker was kind of that line in the sand where, okay, if everybody above DJ Fluker is gone, then you have to kind of think about, well, if you really want an offensive lineman, what are you going to do? It became pretty apparent if you were watching the War Room Cam that the Cowboys were doing something around the time the Steelers were taking Jarvis Jones at number 17. And it was hard to tell what they were trying to do, but Stephen Jones was on the phone several times during that particular period of time. And then the news broke that they had traded down from 18 to 31 to San Francisco. And truthfully, Sports Illustrated's Don Banks had projected that this trade might happen. Because the Niners had so many draft picks, the Cowboys might be looking to trade down, and it transpired exactly how he thought it would, except instead of the Niners taking Carradine, they actually took the safety Eric Reid out of LSU. So that took the Cowboys out of pretty much anybody from an offensive line standpoint that would have helped them, or so I thought, until they took Travis Frederick at number 31, a player whom on CBSSports.com's top 100 board is rated number 96.
Wow. Okay, here's the deal. They trade out of the first pick. I understand they pick up another third-round pick, and I get the fact that they need, a number of players, and they've got a lot of holes to fill. But then we watch, with the picks that were taken from 18 down, we see Eric Reid from LSU go. The Cowboys needed a safety. We see Justin Pugh, the offensive tackle, taken by the Giants. The Cowboys needed offensive linemen. We see Kyle Long from Oregon, taken by the Bears. The Cowboys needed a guard. We see Sharif Floyd from Florida, a defensive tackle. The Cowboys needed a tackle. He's taken by Minnesota. We see Bjorn Werner, a defensive end from Florida State. Granted, that one might not be arguable, but we saw a number. Sylvester Williams from North Carolina taken 28th by Denver. We see a lot of first-round talent that the Cowboys could have had, and they traded out of that pick to go to 31 to pick up Travis Frederick, who I saw your tweet. He was described as being having serviceable football speed. Basically, what?
Speed.
I'm sorry.
Functional football speed.
Functional football speed, which tells me this guy's not a first-round pick.
Well, 105.3 The Fan was talking to Frederick right after he was drafted, and Frederick said he expected to go in the second round. Here's the thing that I find bothersome with this pick is the Cowboys have talked all along about how they're going to take the best player available on the board.
Yeah.
I talked about that all week. I talked about it on Monday. Well, the best player on the board at number 18 was by far Sherry Floyd out of Florida. He was in the top 10 on both CBS and SI's top 100. I mean, he was a top 10 player. He fell at number 18. And if you're interested in taking the best overall player on the board when your pick comes up, then that's the pick you take. So obviously they were not interested in taking the best available player. They were interested in getting an extra pick and then, taking the best player that was there. Well, at number 31, they still could have taken Tank Carradine. He was still on the board. They could have taken several other guys that would have addressed other needs, but instead they reached. They reached for a need. They went out and went after an offensive lineman who, albeit has a good pedigree, comes from a school that produces good offensive linemen, can play guard and center, so he can help you in both places, but they still reached. They didn't draft the best available player. They just reached for what they needed, and that's exactly what they talked about not doing this entire week leading up to the draft.
Saw a number of people tweeting tonight that there was a camera in the war room, in the Cowboys draft room, and when they would take shots of it, it looked like Jason Garrett was utterly miserable was the phrase I saw a couple of times. Do you get the feeling that everybody was not on the same page with this draft?
I'm not sure if that was necessarily the case, but I was watching the War Room cam the whole night, and for the first half of the draft, Jason Garrett was in a very good mood. He was smiling, he was joking around, he was chatting with Jerry and Steven and even Jerry's daughter Charlotte. At one point he and Charlotte were looking at an iPad together. He seemed like that he was in a very good mood. Once the trade happened, and I'm not a big believer in body language, but every time I checked the War Room cam for about the next half hour to 45 minutes after the trade, he was quiet. He wasn't doing a whole lot. He was looking at paperwork. He really wasn't interacting with people. That tells me that there was something that they were hoping would happen. A player that they were hoping would fall to them at number 18 that just didn't fall. And, perhaps he took it harder than Jerry or Steven did. Perhaps, there was a player he wanted that he could not convince Jerry or Steven to take at that selection. Perhaps Jerry and Steven were intent on trading the pick, and Jason, didn't agree. And obviously, Jerry being the general manager, he's going to make that decision. And they're getting ready to have the press conference here in a few minutes. So I doubt they'll give us any clarity as to what was going through their mind at number 18 in terms of that. But there was a noticeable change in Jason Garrett after the trade for about the first hour after the trade. There was a definite noticeable change in his body language and how he was interacting with everybody else in the room. Something happened, but I don't think we'll ever really know what happened.
Well, I get that they missed out on a lot of guys that they really wanted. I understand that they really, really wanted a guy like a Chance Warmack and people like that Sheldon Richardson. I get that those guys weren't there. Even Kenny Vaccaro wasn't there at that point. But there were still first-round graded talents at all of their needs, at safety, at offensive line, and defensive line, and they passed on all of these guys. When they traded out, they passed on all of those guys to take a reach in Travis Frederick, who may turn out to be a great player. We have no idea. But at this point, it looks like just another case of Jerry Jones trying to prove he's the smartest guy in the room and seemingly clearly over his head when it comes to evaluating talent.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with you that Jerry has a checkered history in evaluating talent, but you also have to look at the money in this situation as well. We talked about this a little bit, I think, previously. By trading down to 31, the Cowboys will save about $1.2 million in bonus money to Travis Frederick, and they'll save about $10 million over the life of the contract. You got to remember, the other component in this is that they are still very much up against the salary cap for this year, and that money that they save could potentially be used to sign that other pick they're going to make in the third round. It could also be used potentially to sign a free agent. So that's another component of it as well. They know what their cap situation is. Everybody knows what their cap situation is, and by trading down, they can take advantage of that a little bit financially.
Okay, here's some of the national.
That to me, I think is actually might be the bigger reason behind all this.
So in other words,
they know the cap situation and they need space.
All right, so in other words, instead of taking the best player available and trying to improve this team, they went with a blue light special, and they're going to get a guy that's not going to make the team and is going to be working for Kmart come August.
Well, that's certainly one way of looking at it. I mean, I think it's a very curious selection myself. I mean, Frederick came into this draft as the highest-rated pure center on the board, but most everybody agreed that he was going to be nothing more than a second-round pick. Several years ago, the Patriots made a pick at this actual selection at number 31. They picked a center out of Michigan that nobody had really heard a whole lot about, and nobody really considered to be a first-round pick. And his name was Logan Mankins. And Mankins is now firmly entrenched in that offensive line. If Travis Frederick works out like Logan Mankins, then this is a fantastic pick. But given the fact that the Cowboys need help on the offensive line, and they reached for a guy who, by value is a third-round pick, they've really set an expectation that Frederick may never be able to meet, even if he does become a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro player. I think they've kind of set him up in a position where people are going to perceive him, like you said, as a blue light special or as a Kmart kind of player, when really he's not. But they traded down to get him, and then they reached for the need instead of taking the value, somewhere along here, like you were talking about. One of these other players that was available at number 18, they did everything that they told us they weren't going to do during the week, especially drafting for need as opposed to drafting the best available player.
And Matthew, just to point out something, you were talking about the reason for this being, a lot of this being driven by the finances and the salary cap, but basically what they're going to do now, granted, this guy's not going to cost them what the 18th player in the draft would be, but they're going to pay a second or third round projected offensive lineman first-round draft pick money. So that seems incredibly stupid to me.
Well, I don't know exactly how much they would have to pay that extra third-round pick. Likely, it's going to be in the range of $400,000 to $500,000 a year. So when you look at it over the life of the contract, you also have to look at it as from the standpoint of they're not going to give a lot of bonus money to that extra third-round pick. So they probably end up saving in the bargain this year probably about, ballpark figure, probably $1 million, I would guess, in that respect, maybe a little less overall over the life of the contract. This is the same thing they had to go through in the late 90s when they were cap strapped. They would trade out of the first round because they knew they couldn't pay that first-round guy. And even with the salary structure now in the new CBA, where you have salary slotting and you have a general idea what all picks are going to be worth when you make them, when you're this high up against the cap like the Cowboys are, sometimes you have to make decisions like that. And finances may very well have driven what they did on Thursday night.
Well, I know the national reaction has been very mixed. Albert Breer said the text from one AFC personnel man when I told him the Cowboys took Frederick, he said, yuck. Brian Billick said Frederick is just like Peter Kontz from last year, can play offensive guard in a pinch, but natural position is OC. Center, can't go wrong taking a Wisconsin offensive lineman. Ian Rappaport from NFL.com says that he heard that the offensive line was always the focus. Guards were gone, so they took center Travis Frederick from Wisconsin, a tough dude. So he may turn out to be a fine player, and I don't mean to criticize Travis Frederick. He may turn out to be an outstanding player for the Cowboys, but it just looked like there was an awful lot of really good players that they passed on when they dropped down that they could have had who could have improved this football team, and it seems like they underachieved in this first round. Now the question is, looking at the offensive line right now, and I realize you still got a number of picks to be made before this draft is over, but plug him in, what's this offensive line look like and how much is it improved based on just the drafting of center Travis Frederick?
Well, I can't sit here and tell you that it's improved a whole lot. And to go back to your point a minute ago about what Rappaport said, that to me pretty much proves that like you said, their emphasis, the way they drafted shows that their emphasis was on the offensive line.
Which I agree with completely. I think they had to do that.
But it goes back again to what we were talking about before, is all week they were telling us we're going to take the best available player, we're going to take the best available player. I can't fathom a big board in which Travis Frederick is the number 30 player on the board, anybody's draft board. But, at Wisconsin, Frederick played left guard. He also played center. So if you're looking at how he projects in the offensive line right now, he's obviously going to provide competition at both center and guard. I'm sure the Cowboys are going to let him duke it out with Bernardo and Livings and Cook and Costa to see if he can overtake one of those guys on the offensive line. And based on the way they played last year and based on the way Frederick played at Wisconsin, it's certainly possible that he could be a starter on opening day. That shows you how much that offensive line with the Cowboys underachieved last year. Livings was an undrafted free agent. Bernardo was a 7th-round pick. Frederick is a 1st-round pick, even though he's valued at probably a 2nd or a 3rd. That tells me that they intend for him to come in and compete right away and perhaps start right away. And given what we saw out of Livings and Bernardo last year, he could very well be able to overtake one of them and be a starter come the opening night game against the Giants.
All right. Any other major surprises? I mean, we mentioned the fact that quarterback Geno Smith and linebacker Manti Te'o slipped through the 1st round and are moving on into the 2nd round now. Those are probably the 2 biggest names that didn't get taken in the 1st round. Any other major surprises that you saw in the 1st round overall?
Well, those back-to-back picks of Justin Pugh and Kyle Long kind of surprised me a little bit. The Giants probably do need some help at guard. Based on where everything was at that particular point in the draft, I guess Pugh is probably the best guard tackle combo on the board. CBS had him at 42. He wasn't even in Sports Illustrated's top 40. So, that feels like a bit of a reach. Kyle Long, to me, to Chicago at 20 feels like a huge reach. He was 73 on CBS's top 100. So they, the Bears really kind of reached there at a position where I really felt like they could have gotten great value taking a guy like a Cordarrelle Patterson out of Tennessee, who was a top 20 player and was falling down the board because nobody was really addressing skill positions. Patterson ended up going to Minnesota at 29, and Minnesota gave up a lion's share to get back into that selection. They gave up 4 picks. The Patriots are going to be set for the rest of this draft. They got 4 picks just to trade out of the 1st round and got tremendous value in doing so. And, and in a roundabout way, Jerry was roundly criticized on Twitter. One fan would say, well, the Patriots got great value for that 29th pick, and Jerry got lousy value for that 18th pick. So that was the big thing to me. The Vikings were really busy. They addressed their needs on defense. They got Floyd at number 23. They got Xavier Rhodes, the cornerback, at number 25, and they came back into the 1st round to get a receiver that should be able to help their offense in Cordarrelle Patterson. I think if you look at it just on paper, they were the big winner because they had 3 big needs coming into this draft, and they addressed all of them the first night.
Okay, so we can debate the merits of picking Travis Frederick all we want to, but the bottom line on this is that the Cowboys made this trade so that they could not only pick Travis Frederick, but they could add an additional pick, which gives them another player that they have the opportunity to hit or miss on. And based on their draft history, they've missed on more than they've hit on. So you have to judge this thing based on what they do now in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, with now 2 picks in the 3rd round as opposed to 1. What do you anticipate happening in the 2nd round on Friday?
Well, I think getting that extra pick gives them an opportunity to address the offensive line a little bit more. We talked during the pre-draft podcast about the fact that they might go after 2 offensive linemen in this draft. Getting that extra pick in the 3rd round gives them an opportunity to do that. There are still some very good players out there that could very well flip to them in the 2nd round that could address areas of need. They need to address the defensive line still. DeMontre Moore's still out there from A&M. Marcus Hunt's still out there from SMU. So is Tank Carradine. That would address the defensive end rotation. If you're looking at inside defensive players, Kawan Stewart is still out there. Now, in my my perfect draft scenario for the Cowboys, Kawan Short was actually my second-round pick. He is a great candidate for the under tackle position in the cover 2, so that's somebody to keep your eye on. Jesse Williams is also a defensive tackle that could be there, and we had that run of Alabama players in the middle of the first round. Jesse Williams would be a solid selection there. They want to go offensive in the second round. Malenik Watson is still out there, the offensive tackle from Florida State. He's certainly somebody that rose up a lot of boards. Another guy who's out there is Larry Warford, the guard from Kentucky, another player that I felt like would be a good fit for them in the second round. I'm not sure if they turn right around and address the offensive line in the second round, but I feel as if it looks like they're addressing needs as opposed to addressing value. So if they're addressing needs, then they need to look at defensive tackle, they need to look at defensive end, they need to look at the offensive line. And if you're looking at safety, Jonathan Cyprian is still out there. He's a player who was in the first round of some mock drafts, and a player that some folks thought the Cowboys would take at number 31 if they traded down. So, there's still a lot of good talent out there. We talked about it on Wednesday. This is a draft that is light on high-end talent, but there's a lot of meat in the middle. And I think, but judging by the fact that the Cowboys traded down to get an extra pick, they must believe the same thing, that they can really do a good job of addressing the needs that they have with an extra pick, and that the quality is going to be there when they take that pick. Now, it's Jerry Jones, so you never know what he's going to do. You never know who he's going to take, but they're in a position where they can address needs and they can get good value if they pick the right players.
Yeah, I get the impression, based on all the national reaction, not only from the professionals but just the people on the Facebook and Twitter who are just fans, that if this was Ozzie Newsome running this draft and traded down and got an additional pick, then we'd be pretty okay with this. With Jerry Jones, we know it's a high wire act with no net, so anything is possible, and that's what scares the devil out of all of us.
I almost would have liked to have seen the Cowboys trade up. I mean, if offensive line was really what they wanted to address, if that was the position they really wanted to help themselves at, they had enough value, in that second round pick where they could have traded up to the 9th selection and gotten the Jets pick and taken Chance Warmack, the player that I really felt like was the best fit and the best bang for their buck if he had fallen to number 18. There's enough value in those picks for them to move up to number 9 if they gave up their second round pick. To me, if that's your strategy, if you're going to address the need, then go out and address the need. To me, Chance Warmack is going to be a quality pro for the next 10 years. I really believe that. I'm not sure if Travis Frederick is going to be that. And that's the big difference right now between what they could have done on Thursday night and what they did do on Thursday night. They picked a guy that may or may not be a solid pro offensive lineman instead of perhaps trading up to get a guy or taking a guy like a Sharif Floyd, who very likely will be a solid pro for years to come.
So when it's all said and done, it's business as usual at Valley Ranch. There is no predicting what goes on in the mind of Jerry Jones, and we have no idea what the plan is, but the mad scientist continues to tinker in ways that seem to confound all of us. So one thing we can always say is it's always going to be entertaining. It may be maddening if you're a Cowboy fan, but it's always going to be entertaining because you just never know what Jerry's going to do to throw everyone, including, I think, his own coaching staff, a curve.
Absolutely. It is never a dull moment around Valley Ranch, that's for certain.
Well, Matthew, thanks very much for evaluating this first-round pick. I'm sure we'll be talking again on Friday after round 2 as we see how the Cowboys continue to work this draft to try to improve this team that has so many needs. It was a strange night tonight. If you had to give it a grade, what would you give it?
The overall first night of the draft for the Cowboys or for the whole league?
For the Cowboys.
For the Cowboys, I think it's a pretty average draft. I'd say C. I'll be charitable and give them a C.
Okay.
Like I said, I think that it's possible that he'll develop into a nice quality pro, either center or guard. But when you look at the value out there, when you look at where he was ranked on different boards around the internet by people that I respect, that I believe have the ear of scouts and NFL GMs around the country, the value just doesn't marry up with what they decided to do on Thursday night. I'd give it a C.
All right, well, we will check back in with you after round 2 as we continue to follow the Cowboys draft and try to figure out exactly what goes on in the mind of Jerry Jones. Matthew Postins, thanks very much for coming on with us tonight.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
All right, Matthew Postins, of course, a contributor and follows the Cowboys in the NFL for Rattle and Hum Sports. I'm Bryan Houston. This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast, and we will talk to you next time.